The ambulance lights painted the pine trees red and blue while rain hammered the metal gate hard enough to sound like gunshots across the lake. A little boy inside cabin 4 couldn't breathe. I could hear his mother crying from 50 yards away while the paramedic kept yelling into his radio that they needed access now. And standing right in front of that locked gate, like she owned the whole county, was Allison Mercer in a white raincoat, holding a clipboard against her chest. "This road is under temporary HOA control," she snapped at the deputy. "Nobody enters until we verify residency." The paramedic looked ready to lose his mind. "Ma'am, this is a medical emergency." Allison didn't even flinch. "Then maybe people should learn to follow community regulations." That was the moment I stepped out of the dark with rainwater dripping off my jacket and every eye turned toward me. The deputy recognized me instantly. "Evan," he said quietly, "please tell me you can open this gate." Allison spun around so fast her heels slipped in the mud. "He doesn't have authority here anymore," she barked. "The HOA voted to seize these cabins yesterday morning." I just looked at her for a second. Calm. Silent. That silence made her nervous. People like Allison always get nervous when you don't argue back. Then I looked at the deputy and said, "You might want to ask her one question before you touch that lock." The rain kept pounding. Nobody moved. "Ask her who owns the road your patrol car is parked on." And just like that, everything changed. You ever notice how the loudest people in a situation suddenly go quiet when paperwork gets involved? Allison's face tightened so hard it looked painful. "That road belongs to the community," she said fast. Too fast. "It always has." I nodded slowly like I was listening to a child explain how gravity works. "Interesting," I said, "because I paid property taxes on it 3 weeks ago." The deputy looked down at the wet gravel under his boots. The paramedic stopped pulling on the gate. Even the security guard Allison hired looked confused now. That's the funny thing about fake authority. It sounds real right up until somebody asks for proof. The little boy inside the cabin started coughing again, deep and rough, and his mother screamed for help. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out a key ring, and unlocked the gate myself. The ambulance flew past me, tires spraying mud everywhere as it raced toward cabin 4. Allison stepped in front of me immediately. "You just violated an active HOA seizure order," she hissed. "Did I?" I asked. "Because last time I checked, emergency vehicles are legally allowed to use private access roads during a medical crisis. You know, assuming the road actually belongs to the person making the decision." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out this time. Big difference. 10 minutes earlier, she'd been acting like the queen of the lake. Now she looked like someone realizing they walked into the wrong courtroom. Here's the thing. Allison Mercer thought she had already beaten me. Yesterday morning, her HOA board voted to seize all 12 of my lake cabins over what they called unsafe rental violations. By sunset, they had security guards at my gate, printed notices on every cabin door, and emails sent to half the county claiming my properties were under HOA jurisdiction. Most people would panic. Most people would start yelling. Some would probably threaten lawsuits right there in the rain. I didn't do any of that. Because my father taught me something a long time ago while we were pouring gravel onto this exact road back in 1987. He said, "Son, never fight the loudest person first. Let them keep talking long enough to bury themselves." Turns out that was excellent legal advice. Allison just didn't know it yet. And what she definitely didn't know was that every moving truck, every Amazon delivery, every propane service, every contractor, every sheriff's deputy, every HOA golf cart, and every single resident in her precious gated lake community depended on one thing to get in or out: my road. If somebody tried taking your family property using fake paperwork and intimidation, would you fight back immediately or wait until they made a bigger mistake? Because what Allison Mercer did next made locking that ambulance gate look smart. Let me back up a little because none of this started with ambulances or deputies or Allison Mercer standing in the rain pretending she owned half the county. It started with my father in a dirt road carved through pine trees almost 40 years ago. Back then, this whole area around Blackwater Lake was nothing but old fishing cabins, muddy trails, and retirees who waved at every passing truck, whether they knew you or not. My father, Daniel Cole, bought the first 6 acres in 1974 after coming home from working pipeline construction in Wyoming. He was not rich. Not even close. The man fixed his own boots with duct tape and thought restaurants were a waste of money unless somebody else was paying. but he understood land better than anybody I have ever met, especially access. He used to sit on our porch drinking burnt coffee at 5 in the morning saying stuff that sounded boring when I was a kid but feels real important now. People think ownership is about buildings, he would say. It is not. Ownership is about who controls the way in. At 12 years old, I thought he was just rambling like old men do. Turns out he was teaching me survival. We built those cabins one at a time over 15 years. Not fancy vacation homes either. Real cabins. Cedar walls. Tin roofs. Stone fire pits. Places where regular families could actually afford to spend a week fishing without taking out a second mortgage. Cabin 3 still has crooked shelves because I installed them myself when I was 16. My father laughed so hard at those shelves he almost fell off the ladder. Said they looked drunk. We kept them anyway. After my wife Laura passed away 6 years ago, those cabins became the only thing keeping me moving forward. Cancer does something strange to time. One minute you are arguing over what movie to watch, and the next you are standing in a silent kitchen staring at coffee cups nobody else will ever use again. I could not stay in Denver after she died. Too many memories in every room. So I came back to the lake. Started managing the cabins full-time. Fixed docks. Repainted porches. Changed water heaters. Quiet work. Honest work. The kind where your hands stay busy enough to stop your brain from falling apart. Every morning, I walked that gravel road with a coffee mug in one hand, checking on guests before sunrise. Some mornings the lake looked like glass. Other mornings fog rolled over the water so thick you could barely see 20 feet ahead. But it was peaceful. The kind of peaceful people from cities pay thousands of dollars trying to find. Then developers discovered Blackwater Lake. That is always how these stories start. Somebody from out of town looks at quiet people living simple lives and thinks, you know what this place needs? Luxury branding. Within 3 years old fishing lots turned into giant lake houses with outdoor kitchens nobody used and garages bigger than my first apartment. Property taxes climbed. Local diners disappeared. Suddenly, everybody around here started using words like upscale and premium. Then came Allison Mercer. First time I saw her was at the county marina 2 summers ago. White Range Rover. Perfect hair. Sunglasses bigger than my hand. She stepped out holding one of those expensive stainless steel water bottles and immediately started complaining about the smell of fish near the boat ramp. At a marina. I should have known trouble was coming right then. A month later, she became president of the newly formed Blackwater Ridge Homeowners Association. Funny thing was, my cabins were never inside the HOA boundaries. Neither was my road. But that did not stop Allison from acting like she ran everything within 10 miles of the lake. At first it was small stuff. She sent letters asking me to repaint Cabin 7 because the color looked, and I quote, economically depressing. Then came complaints about guests parking pickup trucks outside overnight because it hurt the community image. One afternoon, she actually walked onto my property holding a clipboard and asked if I planned to replace my wooden signs with something more modern. I looked at her and said, the signs are older than your subdivision. She smiled that tight fake smile people use when they are trying not to show anger. Progress is important, Evan. So is minding your business, I told her. That was the first moment her mask slipped. Just for a second. But I saw it. People like. Allison cannot stand hearing no, especially from somebody they think is beneath them. And the second she realized she could not control me the easy way, she started looking for another way. What I did not know yet was that she had already been studying my cabins, my guests, my permits, and most importantly, that road. At first, Allison tried to make everything sound friendly. That is how people like her operate. They do not kick your door down on day one. They smile. They organize meetings. They use words like community and improvement while quietly tightening a leash around your neck. About 3 months after the HOA formed, I started getting invitations taped to my cabin doors. Blackwater Ridge Community Vision Meetings. Fancy gold lettering. Expensive paper. Every single one signed by Allison Mercer herself. I ignored the first 2. Big mistake. The third invitation came certified mail with a note written in blue ink across the envelope. Attendance strongly recommended. That made me laugh out loud right there in my kitchen. Strongly recommended by who? The Queen of Blackwater Lake. But I went anyway because sometimes you need to hear exactly how crazy somebody is before you understand how dangerous they might become. The meeting was inside the new clubhouse overlooking the marina. Place smelled like fresh paint and overpriced candles. About 40 people sat in folding chairs eating little cheese cubes while Allison stood in front of a giant projector screen, wearing a white blazer that probably cost more than 1 month of my cabin income. She smiled when I walked in. Not a real smile, though. More like the kind a cat gives a bird. "Evan," she said loudly enough for everybody to hear. "I am so glad you came." I grabbed coffee from the back table. Terrible coffee. Tasted like hot dirt. "Could not miss all this excitement," I said. A few people laughed quietly. Allison did not. Then she started her presentation. Slides about property values, tourism growth, security concerns, future investments. Every 5 minutes, she used phrases like premium lake experience or modernized community standards. One slide showed an aerial map of the lake divided into neat little zones. That caught my attention fast because my cabins were highlighted in yellow. Allison pointed at the screen with a laser pointer. "These older rental clusters create inconsistency within the long-term development vision." Older rental clusters. That was apparently the new fancy phrase for cabins built by working people. A guy near the front raised his hand. "Are those cabins even part of the HOA?" Allison smiled without blinking. "Not officially at this time." At this time. There it was. She kept talking. "However, access, integration, and safety compliance affect the entire surrounding area." I noticed several people nodding, even though they clearly had no idea what she was talking about. That is another thing people like Allison understand. If you sound confident enough, half the room assumes you must be right. Then came the first real warning sign. Allison switched slides, and suddenly there was my road on the screen. My road. Every curve. Every gravel turnout. Every drainage ditch my father and I dug by hand 20 years ago. "This access corridor is becoming a liability issue," she announced. "Emergency vehicles currently experience delays due to uncontrolled rental traffic." I nearly choked on my coffee. Uncontrolled rental traffic? My cabins maybe had 6 trucks parked outside on the busiest summer weekend of the year. Meanwhile, half the HOA residents drove giant SUVs like they were invading a small country. I raised my hand. "Funny," I said. "The fire department never complained to me." Allison tilted her head slightly. "That is because they have not conducted their full review yet." Yet again, another little word designed to sound harmless while planting fear in everybody's head. She was good at that. Real good. After the meeting ended, a retired electrician named Hank pulled me aside near the parking lot. "Watch yourself around her," he muttered quietly. "My nephew worked construction on the new subdivision. Said developers have been trying to buy your cabins for over a year." That stopped me cold. Nobody ever called me. Hank snorted. "Maybe because they already know you would say no." On the drive home, I started noticing things I should have noticed earlier. New security cameras near the entrance road. Survey stakes appearing along the ditch line. HOA maintenance trucks parked near my property taking pictures. Allison was not just running a neighborhood association. She was building a case. 2 weeks later, I found the first official violation notice nailed directly to Cabin 8. It claimed one of my guests had parked a fishing boat too close to the roadside drainage easement. Fine amount due within 10 business days. I stood there staring at the paper while the wind blew lake mist across the porch. Then I started laughing again because the easement they referenced did not even belong to the HOA. They were citing rules on property they did not control. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made my stomach tighten. Because nobody gets that bold unless they think they already have power backing them up. And Allison Mercer was just getting started. The first real attack happened right before Memorial Day weekend, which for cabin rentals is basically Christmas. Every cabin was booked. Families from Kansas, Nebraska, and Colorado were already driving in with fishing poles strapped to truck beds and coolers full of groceries. I had spent 3 straight days cleaning docks, checking smoke detectors, fixing a busted screen door on cabin 6, and laying fresh gravel near the boat launch. Around noon Friday, I heard engines near the road entrance and figured another guest had arrived early. Instead, I found 2 private security trucks parked sideways across the entrance gate. Black uniforms, yellow safety vests. One guy holding a clipboard like he was guarding Fort Knox instead of a gravel road in northern Idaho. And standing beside them, wearing giant sunglasses and white capri pants, was Allison Mercer. Of course. She smiled the second she saw me walking up. "Perfect timing," she said. "We are implementing temporary traffic control measures for the holiday weekend." I looked at the trucks blocking the road. On my property, one of the guards stepped forward immediately. "Sir, This access point is now under HOA management supervision. HOA management supervision. That sounded official right up until you realized it meant absolutely nothing. I looked past them and saw 3 pickup trucks backed up near the highway. My guests. A little girl sitting in one truck had her face pressed against the window, looking confused. Her father climbed out holding a printed reservation email from me. "Hey buddy," he yelled. "They are saying we cannot get through without paying some kind of fee." Allison folded her arms. Holiday access permits are now required for all short-term rentals entering Blackwater Ridge. I actually laughed because the audacity was unbelievable. "You are charging people to use my road." Her fake smile never moved. "We are protecting community infrastructure from excessive rental traffic." There it was again. Community infrastructure. Fancy words designed to make theft sound responsible. I walked over to the nearest security truck and looked at the magnetic company logo on the door. North Peak Security Services. Then I looked at the guard. "You got a contract for this?" He hesitated. Tiny hesitation. Barely noticeable. But I caught it. "We are working under HOA authorization, sir." Authorization, not ownership. Big difference. "You might want to read your paperwork real carefully," I told him. Allison stepped between us immediately. "Do not intimidate my staff, Evan. Then tell your staff to stop blocking my paying guests." A minivan pulled up behind the trucks, and an older woman leaned out the window looking frustrated. "We have been driving for 9 hours, she snapped. "What is going on?" Allison switched into customer service mode so fast, it almost gave me whiplash. "Just a small compliance update, ma'am. We are preserving property values and improving safety standards." The older woman stared at her for 2 seconds. "Lady, I just want to unload my groceries." I almost smiled. Regular people see through nonsense faster than politicians do. Allison handed the woman a laminated sheet listing new, temporary access regulations. $50 road maintenance fee. Parking inspection fee. Boat launch review fee. Completely made-up garbage. The woman looked down at the paper. "This sounds fake as hell." Even one of the guards coughed, trying not to laugh. Allison's face tightened again. These policies were approved by the HOA board. I stepped closer and lowered my voice. "You know what was not approved?" She looked irritated already. "What? You operating commercial checkpoints on private property you do not own." For just 1 second I saw panic flicker across her face. Small, fast, but real. Then it vanished. "The county will decide that," she said coldly. Actually, county records already decided it back in 1987. That hit harder than I expected because she stopped talking completely. Most people argue when they think they are right. Silence usually means somebody just touched the truth. But then Allison did something that changed the entire situation. She pulled out a stack of papers from her clipboard and handed one directly to me. "Official Notice of Property Compliance Review." My stomach tightened immediately. According to the document, all 12 cabins were now under investigation for zoning, safety, environmental, and occupancy violations. Failure to cooperate could result in temporary closure orders. "You cannot be serious," I said quietly. Allison finally smiled again. "Oh, I am very serious." The little girl from the pickup truck rolled down her window and asked her dad, "Are we still going fishing?" Nobody answered her. The wind coming off the lake smelled like rain and pine needles while I stood there reading page after page of legal-sounding threats printed on expensive paper. That was when I realized this was never about parking or boats or traffic. Allison Mercer wanted those cabins gone, and she thought she had finally found a way to make that happen. The next month felt like living under a microscope. Every single day Allison found some new reason to send notices, complaints, or inspectors onto my property. One morning, it was improper drainage management. 2 days later, it was unregulated outdoor fire risks. Then came excessive guest turnover concerns, whatever that was supposed to mean. I started getting so many certified letters that the lady at the post office joked about giving me my own mailbox shelf. Funny thing was, none of the complaints made sense together. One notice claimed I had too many guests using the cabins. Another claimed the cabins were sitting empty too often and hurting tourism consistency. It was like they were throwing every possible accusation at the wall hoping one would stick. But what really bothered me was how organized it all felt. Every complaint arrived perfectly timed. Every inspection request happened before busy weekends. Every issue targeted something that could scare renters away. And it was working. By mid-June, I started getting cancellation emails almost every day. One family from Utah called me sounding nervous. "Mr. Cole," the husband said quietly, "we got an email from the HOA warning us there may be legal issues with the cabins." I leaned back in my chair staring out at the lake while anger crawled slowly up my spine. "What email?" Silence. Then he forwarded it to me. The sender was not even hiding anymore. Blackwater Ridge Community Compliance Office. Official HOA advisory notice regarding active property investigations and potential access restrictions. Potential access restrictions. There it was again. The road. Everything kept circling back to the road. I drove straight to the HOA office after reading that email. Small building near the marina with fake stone walls and giant windows overlooking the water like they were running a tech company instead of bothering retirees about mailbox colors. Allison was inside talking to two board members when I walked in. She looked annoyed immediately. "Can I help you?" she asked in that sugary voice people use right before they poison your coffee. I held up the printed email. "You are contacting my customers now?" Allison barely glanced at the paper. "We are informing the community about ongoing compliance concerns. You are costing me business." She folded her hands neatly on the desk. "Actions have consequences, Evan." I laughed once. Short. Sharp. Actions like pretending you own roads you do not own. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Older guy named Richard who used to teach high school history. Nice man. Nervous man. He would not even look me in the eye anymore. Allison leaned forward slightly. "You keep saying that like it matters." That sentence stayed stuck in my head all day. Like it matters. That was the moment I realized something important. Allison did not care whether she was legally right. She only cared whether people believed she had power. Big difference. Real authority comes from law. Fake authority comes from confidence and intimidation. And most people never stop long enough to check which one they are dealing with. Things got worse after the 4th of July weekend. Allison hired a private inspection company from Spokane to evaluate all 12 cabins. 3 men showed up wearing matching polo shirts and carrying clipboards. One of them spent 20 minutes measuring the distance between my boat dock and a drainage ditch. Another took pictures of electrical outlets that had passed county inspection 2 years earlier. Finally, I walked outside and asked the oldest guy what exactly they were looking for. He lowered his clipboard and sighed quietly. Honestly. He glanced toward the road entrance where Allison's white Range Rover sat parked under the trees. "They are trying to classify these as non-conforming commercial rentals." I crossed my arms. "Which means they could push for temporary closure until county review." There it was. Finally, the real goal. Not fines, not parking, not safety. Closure. The inspector looked almost embarrassed. "For what it is worth, your cabins are in better shape than half the lake properties I inspect." Then he lowered his voice further. "You did not hear this from me, but somebody on that HOA board thinks your land would make a perfect expansion area for future waterfront development." Waterfront development. My father's cabins. My wife's favorite dock. The old cedar sign hanging near cabin 3. They saw all of it as future development space. That night, I could not sleep. I sat on the porch outside cabin 1 listening to frogs down by the shoreline, while paperwork covered the table beside me. Inspection notices. Access complaints. Emails. Threats. Compliance reviews. My father used to say paper trails tell the truth louder than people do. So around 2 in the morning, I stopped feeling angry and started paying attention instead. I spread every document across the porch table and noticed something strange. Every single notice referenced community access authority. Not one referenced actual road ownership. Not one claimed the HOA legally held title to the road itself. That felt important. Very important. The next morning, I drove into town and pulled property tax records from the county website. Then I checked them again. Then a third time because I honestly could not believe what I was seeing. For 36 straight years, the same parcel number had been billed to one name. Daniel Cole. Then after my father passed away, Evan Cole. Me. Not the HOA. Not the developer. Me. I sat there staring at the screen while a slow smile spread across my face for the first time in weeks. Because suddenly Allison's entire operation started looking less like strength and more like panic. And panic makes people sloppy. The strange part was how calm I felt after that. Not happy. Not relaxed. Calm in the same way you feel when a puzzle finally starts fitting together after staring at the pieces too long. For weeks, Allison Mercer had acted like she already owned my property. But the county tax records told a completely different story. And paperwork has a funny way of making loud people very quiet. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office 30 miles away in Sandpoint. Small brick building. Smelled like old paper, burnt coffee, and floor cleaner. The kind of place nobody visits unless something has gone very wrong in their life. A woman named Martha worked the front counter. Late 60s. Reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She recognized my last name immediately. Daniel Cole's boy? She asked. That is me. She smiled softly. Your father fixed my porch steps back in 1994 and refused payment because my husband was in the hospital. That sounded exactly like Dad. Martha helped me pull every document connected to the access road parcel. Original plats, easements, utility agreements, survey maps, maintenance filings. By lunchtime, my table looked like a legal hurricane had blown through it. And the more papers we uncovered, the stranger the whole thing became. The road was not just private property. It was the only legally recorded emergency and utility access point for the entire Blackwater Ridge subdivision. Fire trucks used it. Electric crews used it. County snowplows used it. Even the internet company ran fiber cable beneath it under an easement signed by my father 20 years earlier. Martha adjusted her glasses while reading one of the older filings. Well now, she muttered. This is interesting. What? She slid the document toward me. It was a county development review from 3 years earlier when the luxury subdivision got approved. Right there on page 4 was a line highlighted in yellow. Existing private access agreement with Cole Road parcel required for continued occupancy compliance. I read that sentence 3 times. Required for continued occupancy compliance. I repeated slowly. Martha nodded. Without that road access agreement, those homes technically fail county emergency access standards. I leaned back in my chair staring at the ceiling tiles while my brain tried catching up. Wait, are you telling me that subdivision legally depends on my road? Looks that way. Then why is the HOA acting like they own it? Martha gave me the most tired government worker smile I have ever seen. Because most people never read the paperwork. That sentence hit harder than she probably realized. Most people never read the paperwork. Allison had built her entire strategy around one assumption. That nobody would actually stop and verify what was true. Not renters. Not board members. Not security guards. Maybe not even county officials. Just confidence, pressure, and enough legal-sounding language to scare people into submission. I spent the next 3 hours copying every document I could find. One paper in particular caught my attention. A temporary development access agreement signed by the original subdivision developer before Allison ever arrived at the lake. The agreement clearly stated that the developer acknowledged continued private ownership of Cole Access Road. In plain English, it basically said, "We know this road is not ours, but we need permission to use it." I almost laughed sitting there in that little records room because Allison's entire power play suddenly looked insane. Either she had never read these agreements or she thought nobody else ever would. And honestly, both options were terrifying. On the drive back to the lake, I called an old friend named Greg Bennett, retired property attorney, lives in a cabin outside Coeur d'Alene now, and spends most of his time fishing badly and complaining about politicians. Smartest legal mind I know. I told him everything while driving. He stayed quiet most of the call. Finally, he said, "Evan, I need you to listen carefully." His tone changed completely. "Serious. Do not threaten them. Do not block access. Do not touch that gate. Not yet." I was not planning to. Good. Because if those documents are real, your HOA problem is bigger than harassment. How big? Silence for about 3 seconds. Potential insurance fraud big. That got my attention fast. Greg explained it slowly, so even I could follow it. If Blackwater Ridge had represented to insurers, lenders, or county officials that they controlled permanent legal access to the subdivision when they actually did not, things could get ugly real fast. Especially if emergency services depended on that access. Suddenly the ambulance from part 1 flashed through my head again. Greg kept talking. "You said they are already collecting road maintenance fees?" "Yep." "And operating security checkpoints?" "Yep." "On a road they do not legally own?" "That would be correct." Greg whistled low into the phone. "That is incredibly stupid." I parked outside cabin 5 watching sunlight ripple across the lake while his words sank in. "So what do I do?" Another long pause. Then Greg said something my father probably would have loved. "Nothing. Nothing. Not yet. Let them keep talking. Let them keep documenting their own behavior. Every fake fee, every notice, every checkpoint, every email. Calm people with paperwork beat emotional people with power trips almost every time. I sat there quietly after the call ended while wind moved through the pine trees overhead. For the first time in months, I stopped feeling hunted. Because I finally understood something Allison Mercer did not. She thought the road gave her leverage over me. In reality, the road was the one thing holding her entire luxury subdivision together. And she had just spent months putting in writing that she was controlling property she did not legally own. After that phone call with Greg, I stopped fighting Allison Mercer completely. No angry emails. No arguments at the gate. No showing up at HOA meetings. Nothing. And that confused the hell out of her. People like Allison expect resistance. They feed on it. They want yelling because yelling makes everybody look emotional and messy. Calm scares them, especially when they do not know why you are calm. So I let her keep going. Honestly, it was hard at first. Every instinct I had wanted to push back. But Greg was right. The more Allison talked, the more evidence she created against herself. Within 2 weeks, the HOA sent out another batch of notices to my renters. This time, they claimed temporary occupancy restrictions might affect emergency vehicle access and insurance coverage around the lake. Which was funny because legally the emergency access problem was actually theirs, not mine. I printed every email, saved every voicemail, took pictures of every checkpoint and every fake sign they installed near the road. One sign actually said Blackwater Ridge Controlled Access Corridor in giant white letters. Controlled Access Corridor. On my road. The audacity almost impressed me. Around the same time, Allison started getting bolder in public too. One afternoon, I stopped by the marina store for coffee and bait when I overheard her talking to a real estate agent near the fuel pumps. Once the cabin situation resolves, she said, the North Shoreline expansion will finally move forward. I slowed down immediately. North Shoreline expansion. That was my property. The agent nodded. That land would triple the resort valuation. Allison smiled. Exactly. There it was. Not safety. Not parking. Not community standards. Money. Just plain old money wearing a designer blazer. She noticed me standing there halfway through her sentence. For a split second, her face changed. Then the fake smile came back. Evan, she said brightly. Beautiful afternoon, is it not? Depends who you ask, I replied. The real estate guy suddenly became very interested in a bag of ice near the counter. Allison walked closer, lowering her voice. You know, this whole situation could still end peacefully. Funny, I said. I was thinking the same thing. You should consider selling while values are high. I almost laughed because now she was saying the quiet part out loud. So that is the plan? I asked. Push me out and redevelop the cabins? Her expression tightened just slightly. We are trying to improve the lake community. By removing everybody who was here before you? She folded her arms. Progress requires change. Funny. My father used to call that greed. For the first time since I met her, Allison stopped pretending to be polite. Your father built cheap fishing cabins in the middle of what could become one of the most desirable waterfront developments in the Northwest. There it was again. Could become. Everything with her came back to future profits. She was not protecting the community. She was trying to build a luxury destination. And my cabins were sitting right in the middle of her plans like a giant splinter she could not pull out. A week later, things escalated again. I woke up at 6 in the morning to find orange notices taped across all 12 cabin doors. Emergency HOA Enforcement Review. According to the documents, the HOA board had voted to pursue temporary seizure authority over the cabin properties due to ongoing compliance risks and disputed access management concerns. I stood there in the cold morning air reading the notice twice because it sounded insane. Temporary seizure authority? That is not something a normal homeowners association can just invent because they feel annoyed. But the wording was clever. They never directly claimed ownership. They just used vague legal-sounding language designed to scare people into cooperating. And honestly, it worked on some of the renters. By noon, my phone would not stop ringing. One woman from Oregon sounded near tears. Mr. Cole, are we going to get kicked out? No, ma'am. The notice says the HOA may assume management control of the property. The notice says a lot of things. Another guest asked if law enforcement was involved. Somebody else wanted refunds. By sunset, I had lost 4 reservations worth almost $6,000. Allison knew exactly what she was doing. She was squeezing the business until I either sold or collapsed financially. But here's the part she did not realize. Every fake notice created another paper trail. Every false claim made her legal position weaker. Especially because Greg had started digging deeper into the subdivision records too. 3 nights later, he called me sounding more serious than ever. "Evan," he said, "I found something ugly. That definitely got my attention." "How ugly?" "The subdivision financing package." I sat up straighter on my porch chair. "Okay." According to lender documents filed during development, Blackwater Ridge certified permanent unrestricted legal access to all residential parcels. And silence. Then Greg exhaled slowly. "They referenced your road." I felt my stomach tighten immediately. Referenced it how? Like they controlled it. The lake suddenly seemed very quiet around me. Even the crickets sounded distant. "You are kidding." "I wish I was." Greg explained that several financing documents tied to the subdivision appeared to assume the HOA maintained secure long-term access authority over the main entrance corridor. My entrance corridor. If lenders discover that access rights were never transferred, Greg said carefully, things could spiral fast. How fast? Potentially catastrophic fast. Now I understood Allison's panic. She was not just trying to control cabins anymore. She was trying to protect an entire financial structure built on assumptions that might not legally exist. Suddenly, the fake checkpoints, aggressive notices, and seizure threats made perfect sense. She needed control of that road. Not because she owned it, because without it the entire subdivision could become a legal nightmare. And somehow she still thought intimidation would solve that problem. The county hearing happened on a Thursday morning, and by sunrise the parking lot outside the administration building was already packed. Residents from Blackwater Ridge stood around holding coffee cups and whispering nervously, while local contractors leaned against trucks pretending not to stare at the drama unfolding around the lake. Word had spread fast after the ambulance incident. Once people heard emergency vehicles got delayed at the gate, everybody suddenly started paying attention. Funny how quickly community politics becomes serious when ambulances get involved. I parked beside Greg's truck and sat there for a second staring at the courthouse entrance. Gray sky, cold wind, smell of wet pavement. My father used to say important days always feel strangely quiet right before everything changes. He was right about that too. Greg climbed out carrying 2 thick binders under one arm. "You ready?" he asked. "Not really." He smirked. "Good. Cocky people make mistakes." Inside the hearing room things already looked tense. Allison sat near the front beside 2 attorneys wearing expensive suits and expressions that screamed billable hours. She looked polished as always. Perfect hair, white blazer, calm smile. But I noticed something immediately. She kept checking her phone every 30 seconds. Nervous people do that when they are waiting for problems to arrive. Several HOA residents sat behind her looking confused more than angry. Most of them honestly had no idea what had been happening. They thought this was still about cabin violations and road maintenance. They did not realize the entire subdivision was sitting on a legal landmine. The county commissioner opened the hearing at 9 sharp. "We are here regarding ongoing access disputes, occupancy concerns, and emergency service complaints involving Blackwater Ridge and adjacent private properties." Adjacent private properties. Even the county was carefully avoiding Allison's ownership claims now. Her lead attorney stood first. Tall guy with silver hair and a voice smooth enough to sell fake medicine on television. He spent 20 minutes talking about community safety, infrastructure burdens, and responsible development standards. Every sentence sounded impressive while saying almost nothing. Then he switched to me. "Mr. Cole's unmanaged rental operations have created uncertainty regarding lawful access coordination and long-term community planning." Unmanaged rental operations. That was apparently lawyer language for cabins people actually enjoyed staying in. Allison nodded dramatically during the whole speech like she was watching her favorite movie. Then the attorney held up one of the HOA notices. The association acted reasonably under emergency authority concerns involving access management. Greg leaned toward me whispering quietly. "Notice what he is not saying." I whispered back. "Ownership." Exactly. They danced around that word like it was radioactive. Because they knew. The county commissioner finally looked toward our side of the room. "Mr. Bennett?" Greg stood slowly carrying one binder to the front table. Calm. No dramatic speech. No raised voice. "Before discussing occupancy issues," he said, We should probably clarify who legally controls the road at the center of this dispute. Dead silence. Allison stopped checking her phone. Greg opened the binder and placed 3 documents in front of the commissioner. Original property plats, tax records, recorded easement agreements. Then he said the sentence that changed the entire room. Coal Access Road remains privately owned property under continuous recorded ownership since 1987. One of Allison's attorneys immediately jumped in. The association exercises functional control under community necessity. Greg nodded calmly. Functional control is not legal ownership. That hit hard. You could actually feel the room shift. The county fire chief, sitting near the back, suddenly leaned forward. So did 2 representatives from the utility company. Greg kept going. In fact, multiple development approvals for Blackwater Ridge specifically acknowledged continued dependency on Mr. Cole's private access corridor. The commissioner adjusted his glasses, reading through the documents slowly. Is this accurate? He asked Allison's attorney. Nobody answered right away. Huge mistake. Silence in hearings is dangerous, especially when paperwork is sitting on the table. Finally, the attorney cleared his throat. The subdivision has operated under assumed access continuity for several years. Greg smiled slightly. Assumed by who? Another silence. Then things got worse for Allison real fast. Greg opened the second binder. Financing records, insurance filings, development agreements. Several documents submitted during subdivision expansion represented stable, permanent access conditions that were never legally transferred. One of the utility representatives literally muttered, "Oh no." The commissioner looked up sharply. Are you telling this board the subdivision may not possess legally secured emergency access rights? Greg answered carefully. I am saying the subdivision depends entirely on continued permission from the Cole Road parcel. Entire room exploded into whispers. Allison finally stood up. This is ridiculous, she snapped. That road has serviced the community for years. Greg stayed perfectly calm. Because Mr. Cole allowed it. That sentence hit harder than anything else said all morning. Allowed it. Not owned by them. Allowed by me. Huge difference. The county fire chief raised his hand next. Commissioner, if emergency access rights are disputed, this becomes a serious liability issue immediately. One of Allison's board members turned pale right there in his chair. Richard, the retired history teacher, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Allison's second attorney whispered something urgently into her ear while flipping through papers faster and faster. Then came the moment I will never forget. The commissioner looked directly at Allison and asked one simple question. Did the HOA knowingly operate checkpoints and collect access fees on privately owned property? Allison opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out, because there was no good answer. Everybody in that room suddenly understood the same thing at the exact same time. The loudest person at the lake had built her entire power structure on a road she never actually owned. Everything fell apart for Allison Mercer after that hearing. Not all at once. More like watching ice crack across a lake one line at a time until the whole thing finally gives way. Underneath you. By the next morning, the county issued an emergency suspension order against all HOA checkpoint operations on the access road. Every fake security barrier disappeared within 24 hours. The giant controlled access sign vanished too. Funny how fast people remove signs when lawyers start asking questions. Then came the insurance problems. That part moved even faster than Greg expected. 3 days after the hearing, Blackwater Ridge homeowners received letters from the subdivision's insurance carrier requesting immediate clarification regarding emergency access authority and roadway control disclosures. Most residents had no idea what the letters even meant, but they understood enough to panic when they saw words like liability review and policy exposure. My phone started ringing constantly, not from renters this time. From homeowners inside the subdivision. One guy named Mark sounded exhausted. Evan, I bought my house 8 months ago. Nobody ever said anything about road disputes. Because there was no dispute, I told him. There was just a woman pretending she owned something she did not. Long silence. Then he sighed heavily. My wife is freaking out about property values. I actually felt bad for some of those people. Most were regular families who honestly believed the HOA was protecting the neighborhood. They had no clue Allison was using fear and paperwork like weapons. Within a week, 2 board members resigned. Richard, the retired teacher, left first. He knocked on my cabin door himself one evening carrying a cardboard box full of HOA files. The poor guy looked 10 years older than he had a month earlier. I should have pushed back sooner, he admitted quietly while standing on my porch. She kept saying the lawyers already verified everything. I took the box from him. People trust confident voices more than they trust boring paperwork. Happens every day. Richard shook his head slowly. My grandfather used to say if somebody talks too fast during a land deal, walk away. Smart man. Inside the box were copies of internal HOA emails. Some of them were unbelievable. One message from Allison literally described my cabins as the final obstacle to complete shoreline optimization. Another discussed pressure strategies for reducing short-term rental viability. She had never cared about safety for 1 second. This whole thing was a business plan dressed up as community leadership. Greg nearly laughed when he read those emails. She documented intent. That is spectacularly stupid. But the biggest moment came 2 weeks later during the special county review meeting. This time the hearing room was overflowing with angry residents. Some demanded answers about property disclosures. Others wanted to know why emergency access rights had never been explained during home purchases. Allison arrived late wearing dark sunglasses even though the hearing was indoors. She no longer looked confident. She looked tired. Real tired. The county commissioner opened the meeting with one sentence that basically ended her reign forever. Blackwater Ridge Homeowners Association is hereby prohibited from exercising authority over Coal Access Road or associated private cabin properties. Just like that. Done. Finished. The commissioner continued speaking while people scribbled notes and whispered all over the room. The HOA would now face an external audit regarding unauthorized fee collection and false compliance notices. County attorneys would also review whether development filings contained misleading representations regarding roadway control. Allison's lawyer tried objecting twice before finally giving up and sitting back down looking miserable. Then one resident stood up from the audience. Older woman wearing a mariner's sweatshirt. So let me get this straight, she said loudly. This whole time, we were paying road fees to an HOA that did not even own the road. Nobody answered her. Because there was no answer that would not sound ridiculous. I looked over at Allison. She stared straight ahead, refusing to make eye contact with anybody. The loudest person at the lake suddenly had nothing left to say. A month later, the HOA formally settled with me. They withdrew every violation notice against the cabins, paid back collected access fees, signed permanent recognition documents acknowledging my ownership of the road. And maybe the funniest part? They now had to negotiate yearly maintenance access agreements with me like normal people should have done from the beginning. I kept the agreements fair too. Snowplows still use the road. Utility trucks still use it. Emergency vehicles always have open access no matter what. Because unlike Allison, I actually cared about the people living there. Life slowly returned to normal after that. Families came back to the cabins. Kids fished off the docks again. One morning, I watched the same little boy from the ambulance night running down the shoreline chasing frogs, while his mother drank coffee on the porch laughing. The gate stood wide open behind them. No guards. No checkpoints. No fake authority. Just gravel crunching under tires and wind moving through pine trees beside the lake. Sometimes I still think about everything my father tried teaching me while we worked on that road all those years ago. Most of it sounded boring when I was young. Easements, property lines, maintenance agreements, tax receipts. But now I understand what he meant. Ownership is not about who talks the loudest. It is about who can prove the truth when the noise finally stops. And paperwork has a very funny way of making arrogant people suddenly run out of words.